Hello, it's 7 p.m. on the dot, so we starting right now. Can everybody hear me clearly?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Good evening, everybody. Good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. Welcome to The Narrative, starting your MBA journey. This is the second edition, and it's focusing on Stanford GSB. The last edition we had was on with Harvard Business School, and it was an amazing session. In case you missed it, you want to check our YouTube channel for a recording of that video. The next thing right now would be talking about The Narrative Africa. This session was put together by The Narrative Africa, and my partner, Blessing, will be telling us what The Narrative Africa is about, why we started The Narrative Africa, and the vision. Hi, Blessing.
Hi, Finn. Hi, everyone. So the Narrative Africa, I mean, just looking at the mainstream media, for example, you see that we have, we have CNN and CNN that is biased. We have Al Jazeera that is biased towards the Middle East. That is based in Qatar, but because of where their headquarters is based, they are biased towards their continent. We have the likes of Al Jazeera based in Qatar, but biased towards the Middle East region. They have BBC based in London, but biased towards Europe and every other thing. Then we have CNN and Fox, which is in America, and the broader North American. But we do not have any mainstream media that speaks to the African continent and is headquartered in Africa. And that is what the Narrative Africa tries to bridge. It's a very, very big shoe, but we think we have the ability to at least try and see what we could do. So what we are trying to do is to talk about the success, the accomplishment of Africans and Africa to the broader global community. So Africans have been doing amazingly well at different fronts, academic, professionally, and personally. And we hope to tell this story in an inspiring fashion and hopefully spur more people to aspire to more daring accomplishments. That's what we hope to achieve. However, in the meantime, we are trying to focus more on management education. And the reason for this is because of the invaluable role that management education plays in the economic development of countries that we can easily pick out of the pocket. Example.
I think we lost Blessing. Hi, Blessing. Am I the only one that can't hear Blessing?
No, I can't hear Blessing too. I can't hear also.
All right. So I guess it's network. We'll just move on. So basically, like he was trying to say, it's basically telling African stories and hoping to inspire other Africans that they can do better for themselves. So these are Africans that have done something that you want to do, and if you think you want to do it, these are people that have done it, and you can do it as well. The sky is really your starting point in anything you want to do. And that is what the narrative really hopes to achieve. And we hope that at the end of this session, if you're really interested in applying to Stanford Business School or any other top business school in the world, you're more inspired to start taking steps towards submitting an application. All right, moving on. Just to put a quick disclaimer out there, this session is organized by The Narrative Africa and not Stanford Graduate School of Business. So if you want any official information from Stanford GSB, please visit their official website. You'll get official information from their website. This is just Africans telling their own perspective. They have gone through this journey and they want to share their story so that we can know that we can do this. So the session is going to be like a Q&A session, right? I have a list of questions for our guests and they will be shared from their own personal experiences. We hope to answer all of your questions in the course of the session. However, if you have any question that was not covered,
what do you have that somebody can choose? You have thinking more, girl. Okay.
Hello, please, can everybody go on mute, please? All right. So like I was trying to say, we have a list of questions and we hope to cover all your questions with this list. However, if you have any other question that was not covered or was not asked during the session, please feel free to send me a chat, and when we get to the Q&A section, I would pick it up. Guys, so we had this expectation form. When you're filling your registration form, we had this part where you say, tell us your expectations, and we got loads and loads of questions on funding. Don't worry, our guests are here to share their experiences and tell us what they did and how they got the funding that they got. So don't worry, we are here for you. So moving on to our guests, next is that they'll be introducing themselves, and afterwards we'll just get right into the Q&A. I would start with Uzoma. Hi, Uzoma. I'd like you to introduce yourself to everybody as well.
Hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes,
Hi,
we can.
can you hear me? Okay, cool.
Yes, you can hear you.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. Like Finn already mentioned, my name is Uzoma. I go by Uzo sometimes. Originally from Nigeria, I grew up in Lagos, did my undergrad in Lagos as well. And just before I went to business school, I was working at the private equity firm in Lagos, which is essentially a firm that used to do investments in other companies. So I was there for about 3 years, and then in 2018, I went to business school at Stanford. I just finished this past June, so I'm done, free and clear. And in a couple of months, I'll be starting my new career or life after business school. So that's my background. Happy to say more as the conversation progresses.
All right. Thank you so much, Uzoma. Hello. Our next guest is Eugene. Hi, Eugene.
Hi, hope you guys can hear me. So I'm Eugene.
Yes,
I'm Kenyan, born and raised in Kenya. Grew up in Western Kenya, near the Ugandan border. Moved to Nairobi for high school, college, and for my first job, and then moved to work in London for about close to 3 years before going to business school. I'm passionate about investing in emerging markets, especially Africa, sports, and random topics. So feel free to ask me about anything. That's my background. I'm a first year, just finished my first year at Stanford, and I'm also co-chairing the Africa Business Club, where I worked with Uzo a lot last year.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much, Eugene. I'm sure we had about 50 people from Kenya that registered for this session. So I'm sure they are really happy to have you and listen to you speak as well. So moving right into it. So I have questions, and I would like to get your responses, both a response from Uzoma and Eugene, please. We want you to go as personal as possible. We want to hear how you did it so that we can know that it is possible for us to do what we want to achieve, basically. So my first question is around pre-application. So we had lots of questions around why MSc, MBA, why should I go for an MBA and not an MSc? Some people don't know which to choose and what to go for. So we would say, why did you decide to go for an MBA? And how long did it take you from when you knew that you wanted to go for an MBA till the time you applied? How long did that take you from when you decided to go for an MBA till when you actually applied?
I can start. I think the question as to why MBA versus MSc, I think it definitely depends on the person. I think my perspective that MSc degrees can be very specialist, and I was looking for a business degree that was very generalist. I wasn't quite sure that I wanted to specialize in a specific area. So 2 years, a year after I finished my undergrad, a lot of my colleagues from school were applying to MSc degrees, but I didn't quite have a field that I wanted to specialize in. So I just was like, oh, I'm going to go get some more work experience, and then maybe in a couple years out, I'll figure out what exactly I want to do. And I think that an MBA is a very generalist degree that allows you to explore a range of different careers and subject areas. And so that's why I decided to go for an MBA. And as to how long it took from when I decided to when I applied, I would say maybe a year. In fact, I think it was during my performance review in 2016, 2017. I was speaking to my boss at the time, and he was like, "Oh, what do you think is next for your career?" And he was the one that actually brought up the topic of, have you ever considered doing your MBA? I always knew that I would like to go to some top school, but I didn't quite decide that, oh, I want to go do an MBA till I think a year before I actually applied. And it was his prompting that pushed me in that direction. Yeah.
Okay, Eugene, please.
Thank you. So I'd say I grappled with the decision between MBA and MSc as well. And part of that was simply because I was very comfortable at my job and I didn't want to lose my salary. So I thought about, why don't I just do a part-time MBA at London, MSc at London School of Economics or LBS, and keep my salary and my job. So until I had a colleague who did an MSc, and she told me what her experience was. So she knew she wants to work in finance and decided, I don't need to do an MBA. I don't want to try and pivot into tech or entrepreneurship or anything else. So she did an MSc at Princeton for 2 years and graduated around the global financial crisis. And when she went to look for jobs, and she told me at each and every job, MBAs were hired ahead of her, including finance jobs. So I think it became very clear to me that whatever job you want to do, people prefer hiring MBAs from grad school, and that's just because of the leadership training. When people hire people from graduate school, they're trying to look for future leaders of their businesses. And an MSc gives you technical training, but it doesn't train you in the soft skills that you need to become a business leader. So I immediately ruled it out and realized I have to go to an MBA. And then I thought 2 years is such a long time. I'll only do a 1-year program. So I'll go to Oxford or INSEAD or Cambridge for a 1-year MBA. And I think that choice also depends on many things. One is what career you want to go into. So I wanted to work in private equity. I talked to a private equity recruiter and he told me 2-year US MBA anytime, right? It also depends on where you want to be. If you want to work in the US, then they don't rate any degrees from outside the US in the US. If you want to work in Europe, then it makes sense to go to a 1-year program in Europe. If you want to work in Africa, then probably either of them is fine. And then the other thing was also, I'm very keen on working in Africa after my MBA. So I was looking at Africa Focus that school has. So there are some very good schools, but they have no, vibrant Africa clubs. They don't have any funding for Africans. And so for me, those were totally ruled out. And I think I narrowed down to, if I'm going to school for 2 years, then it has to be at a school that has a great reputation globally and has a huge Africa focus. Okay, and so I just applied to Harvard, Stanford, and Wharton in round 1. And my plan B was that if that doesn't go well, I will apply to 1-year programs in the UK. So that's Oxford and Cambridge, and I think INSEAD in France as well, because those 3 schools also have a great reputation in Africa, and I'll still be able to do whatever I want to do from those schools. So that's how I thought about my application strategy. The US has some amazing schools that are great in the US, but they're not really known in Africa, or they don't have a huge Africa student body. They don't have Africa scholarships. So for me, those were totally out of question. I think that's how I thought about it. I spent about a year preparing to apply, and that includes, attending MBA events just to see what the different schools are like, and studying for the GMAT somewhere in between there, and eventually putting together an application. I think you've got to start early, especially if you're applying to the US. Your essays and recommendations are extremely important, much more important than Europe. So you need to spend a lot of time thinking about what you want to do, why you want to do, and some very deep reasons As some of you already know, maybe the essay questions in the US are extremely probing, and you really have to think big picture about where you're taking your career, and your recommendations have to resonate with that. So you can't start looking for a recommender 2 months to the deadline and really hack a US application. I had to identify, the 5-6 people who I think are crazy about my success, and start building that relationship and making sure I feed them all the information that they will need to write my recommendation 1 year down the line.
Thank you so much, Eugene. I feel like you've covered some part of my next question, actually. So I'll just let Uzoma answer that. And if you still have anything to add to it, please feel free to answer it. So my next question was around how you have evaluated your chance of success, right? How did you know that you were ready? And how did you overcome my profile is not Ivy League, considering that we're Africans, right? So we are having to deal with everybody applying from all over the world. So we tend to feel like we probably don't deserve this. So how do you overcome the fear that my profile is not good enough, my profile might not be great enough for these great schools? And what did you do to prepare from when you actually knew that you were going to go for an MBA till you said you submitted an application? Were you doing things like, oh, I need to start doing this for my MBA, I need to start doing this, like some of the things that Eugene mentioned, or you were just like, nah, no need for checklist, I think I have everything covered and let me just apply this year?
I think there are a couple parts to that question. I think to the point you raised around how do you overcome, oh, my profile is not Ivy League. I don't know about Eugene, but I don't think I ever overcome that imposter syndrome till I actually got invited to interview. I just think that these schools attract so many great profiles from across the world. So everybody has that imposter syndrome. The only thing you can do is to apply anyways and trust that and hope that's like you come out at the end of it. So I think that's the answer to that question. In terms of what I was doing, I think when I speak to people who are looking to apply to business school, one thing I ask them is, or one thing I tell them is like, what you need to make sure of is that whatever job you are in, it's a high impact role that you can craft like really interesting stories around. So I think sometimes it's less about the function or the industry, but more around is the role and the job you're doing. Is it high impact enough that you can tell stories that will communicate your leadership skills, what you want to do afterwards, and sort of the ways you have achieved impact over the course of your career? If you don't think you're in that role today, then the question you should maybe be asking yourself is, can I transition to another role that would allow me to get into a high impact position? Because at that point, it's no longer a question of like, is this year a right time to apply? Or does it take 1 year to apply? It might take 2 years or 3 years to get into a job, get some experiences under your resume, and then decide to apply. So I think that's why I usually advise people to start from. And then once you've answered that question, there are the things that Eugene kind of already touched on, which is like, you need to do the GMATs. If you start early, that's obviously better. I think if I were doing my whole application process again, I would definitely start preparing for my GMATs much earlier than I did, because I would have been less stressed. And a lot of people write the GMAT multiple times, so you also have to take that into account. I wrote the GMAT 2 times, and in fact, the second time I wrote it was over Christmas break of 2017, and the applications were due in January 2018. So I literally had 2 or 3 weeks between when I wrote the GMAT and when I submitted, and I wouldn't advise anybody to do that. So try and start earlier. That way you get in more practice. And if you do need to take it again, then you have time to do that. And Eugene already touched on writing your essays. I think that for Stanford especially, the essay question is so probing and personal that I think you need to take some time to really think about the question and how you want to respond to it. I think that's also, a lot of people spend 3-4 months writing their essay, because you can't just write one essay and think that that's your essay. most times you need to do 10 drafts of the same essay to get to like one that's really perfect. And then obviously getting your recommenders in line. There's some prepping work to do in that regard. So it takes time, but as I think what I advise people to do is at the beginning of the process, just list out all of the different things you have to do and think about how you want to allocate your time over 12 to 18 months to do all of those things in preparing to apply.
Okay, thanks, Uzoma. But still back to you. You mentioned high impact roles. What exactly do you mean when you say high impact roles? What do you mean? Do you mean like a top shop, a top job in a big company, or you mentioned the role specifically? So what do you mean?
I think when I say high impact roles, it doesn't necessarily mean working at a Fortune 500 company. I think if you're working at a Fortune 500 company or some company that's known, it's good because when the recommenders look at when the admissions committee looks at your resume, they recognize the name of the company. So that's the plus of working at the company that everybody knows. Say, I don't know, Accenture in Nigeria, or KPMG, or IFC, where Eugene used to work. But if you happen not to be at a company that you recognize, I think being able to talk about the work you were doing, to demonstrate achievements and results. When I say high impact, I mean that you're in a role where you're responsible, where the work you're doing moves the needle, like it pushes the envelope, and you can talk about, oh, I was responsible for ABCD, and what I was doing at this firm allowed them to increase revenues by 100%. So you're able to talk about the role you were doing and the results that led to. So that's really what I mean by high impact roles. Like the firm I was working at just before school, not many people know that firm. But I think by reason of the work I was doing, I could speak to their scale and the way it sort of impacted the team and also just society at large, that the admissions committee was able to connect with that.
Okay, great. So basically, it's more on the role and the impact of your role, not necessarily the company. If it's known, great. If not, talk about your role. I think they're really interested in you and what you've done, and not necessarily where you're working. I don't know if Eugene has anything to add to that.
Yeah, so I think I know I don't really know the profile of people on the call, but I'd say the amount of preparation you have to do really depends on where you are on your journey. If you're just finishing undergrad, then you probably have a lot more room to plan, because you can choose a job. I think the only thing I'd mention is the internet is free. You all have LinkedIn. You can go to any business school that you want to look at on the alumni tool, and under people, and check Stanford Graduate School of Business alumni who are in Africa, and that can show you all the GSB alums in Africa and what they do, or whatever other business school you're applying to. And I think just looking at the range of things that people do, for example, if you're in Nigeria and okay, McKinsey Nigeria sends a lot of people to business school, or ECP or any other company, then your strategy might be, if you're coming out of undergrad, to try and get a job in those institutions. If maybe you have a fast job in something else, then you might want to transition. Let's say if you're 2 years in, you might think of going to do 2 years in a firm that because people who come to business school largely come from, finance, consulting, tech, or startups. And then there's like a 10% that comes from any other industry, public service, nonprofits. So you've got to look at that as you choose your first job. I think the mistake many people in Africa make is that you choose the wrong job, and it makes it very hard to argue your case to business school, either because the career you're in does not require you to go to business school. So let's say if you're an auditor at Deloitte and your goal is to make partner at Deloitte, you don't need an MBA to do that, right? You just need your SCCA or whatever other accounting qualification. So then, the business school doesn't see any in you wanting to go to business school. But if you work in, maybe if you move to the advisory team and say, I want to do, either early stage or late stage investing or advisory work, then an MBA makes sense. So I think use LinkedIn to look at the career paths that most people have had. And that's not to say that you have to follow the same route. There are people who go to business school from all sorts of backgrounds, but at least if you can go to a company that sends a lot of people to business school, that has people who've been to business school, that can help increase your chances. So that's probably a career move you can make if you're still very early in your career. But I agree with Uzo. You never feel ready for these schools. It's extremely intimidating. The more you read poets and quants, the more you feel like you'll never be good enough to go. I think the first time I felt I have a shot maybe was after my Stanford interview, when the person who interviewed me walked me all the way from his office to the train station, and I could tell he just didn't want to stop talking. And I could tell like this interviewer really, really liked me as a candidate. That's probably the first time I even thought I might have a chance of getting accepted. But throughout the process, it's, you always feel like I'm just going to pay these $200 and nothing comes out of it. So that's very normal if that's what you feel.
Okay. I think that helps. It's definitely to know you've gone through that. So guys, however you're feeling, if it's really what you really want, please go ahead and just submit that application. Take your time, plan, do all that you need to do, research. You can actually make it. So moving on to tests. You mentioned that you need to prepare if you have to take it 2 times. So I've heard 2 perspectives regarding this test. I've heard that you have to, it's like the median score for whatever school you're applying to. In the case of Stanford, I think the last one was like 740 for the GMAT, and I think 165 verbal and 165 quant for the GRE. So I've had 2 cases. You have to hit the median score. If you don't hit the median score, please just keep trying and keep trying. And I've also heard that just get a good enough score, because it's really all about your application. So for Stanford, are they big on the test scores? Are they big on I scores? Or so if I get like a 650 in a GMAT, a 690, maybe I can stop focusing on GMAT and focus on other aspects of my application, or I really have to get a really, really high score.
Eugene, do you want to go first?
Okay, I'll go first. So I think on test scores, this is what I'd say. Your application is, you're more than just a GMAT score or a GRE score. So I think how I'd sum it is this: the test score cannot get you admitted, right? But it can make you not get admitted, but it also can't get you admitted. So don't try to study for the GMAT for 2 years to get 800. Even if you get 800, that alone would get you admitted. I have a friend who's going to HBS this year with a 650. I know someone who got accepted to Stanford last year with a 720. So I'm not really sure about the median score theory, but I think you have to look at your application as a whole. If you did, a STEM undergrad, I did actual science undergrad, I had a great GPA. So the school is probably more confident about my quantitative ability to manage the MBA program, and probably my GMAT score is not as important. But if maybe you did a BA in history, right, then your GMAT score is a lot more important. You have to put in a bit more effort to show that you can actually handle finance and accounting and valuation classes. And also, same goes if you had a great undergrad GPA, you've worked in finance, then probably no one thinks you're going to struggle in the MBA. So maybe that GMAT score is not as important a part of your application as someone who's coming from, let's say, someone who studied political science and has been working as an advisor to the Nigerian president, right? Probably that person has to do a lot more work, and especially on the quant side of their score. Some people have already taken, accounting qualifications, CFA, any other professional qualifications that are also can argue to their quantitative strengths. And I think, so I don't think the GMAT is equally important to every applicant. I think they look at your application as a whole. Now, of course, some scores would be too low to be considered, and maybe below a certain level, you must have something else that's outstanding in your application for you to be considered. I don't know what that score is, but definitely, I mean, I'd imagine if you're getting, you know, below 600, then unless you have won a gold medal at the Olympics for Nigeria, or you're Miss Nigeria, or you have a startup, for example, that has done extremely well, then nobody really cares about your GMAT score. So I think you can't just look at a GMAT score on its own. You've got to think about your entire application. What's your quantitative experience? What's your undergrad? What's your GPA, right? So for example, if you didn't get a very good GPA in undergrad and you're worried about it, then the GMAT or the GRE is a chance for you to actually prove that I can do better, right? So you're probably going to put a lot more effort to get a better score, so that the fact that you didn't have a perfect GPA in undergrad is not a problem. So I guess it really depends on the rest of your application, rather than just, you know, a number that applies to everyone.
Quickly, just before Uzo jumps in, how long did you take to prepare for your own GMAT? And if you don't mind sharing your score, really.
No, I wouldn't share my score, because that Stanford wouldn't allow me to do that. That'd be a lot of problem. But I took, and I think this is very different depending on people and how they study. I personally can't study for a long time, so I think I took 3 months to study for the GMAT. I spent 1 month reading and 2 months revising, and then I took my GMAT extremely late. I sat my GMAT 2 days to the first application deadline. I think that was HBS. So that was extremely risky, and no one should do that. But I was working on my GMAT concurrently with everything else. So when applications opened, I filled in everything except GMAT score, essays, and recommendations. And then as I was studying for my GMAT, I was also working on my essays and talking to my recommenders. So everything was concurrent, and that's why I was able to do the GMAT late. But I took 3 months to study. I revised more than I studied, because I realized if you've done British system, GMAT is very American system, and there's much more value in the revision than in the actual studying. So that was my experience. Yeah.
Okay, great, thank you. Sorry.
I think I would echo everything that Eugene said in terms of the GMAT is just one point in it amongst the range of other points that the admissions committee is looking at. And I think people should look at it from that perspective. I would also echo what he said around how I think the lens that the admissions committee applies to reviewing your scores depends a lot on what your background was in your undergrad. So in my case, for example, I mentioned that I took it twice. And the second time, the reason why I needed to take it twice was because my quantitative score wasn't great the first time. So I needed to spend more time sort of working on my quantitative aspect. So I dedicated like a month, and there's this resource online that's focused on quant. It's called Target Test Prep. And I just spent a month focusing on my quant in order to sort of boost my score on that end. But regardless, I had, my background was in economics. I had a very good undergrad, and I'd spent 3 or 4 years in finance. So I could also make a case for them to also look towards that part of my background when they're looking at my GMAT score. In terms of how long it took, I think I spent maybe 6 months, but the caveat there is that I wasn't consistent. So I think people can adopt a wide range of strategies. One is that you can decide to box it in. So you say, I'm only spending 2 months of this on this thing, and every day of the week you're spending 3 hours doing GMAT, reading, practicing with the simulated test. Or you can spread it over a longer period of time, and maybe you're spending an hour every day. So you can take either strategy, sort of depending on your regular job and how busy it is and things like that. I think one thing I've heard from people, which I didn't particularly do, is that whatever strategy that you settle on, the key is to be consistent. So if you say you're going to dedicate 5 hours a day or every weekend or 1 hour a day, try to be consistent so that you because what you're doing is building a muscle. So, and in order to do that, consistency is kind of important. So those are things I've had. But I think also your score shouldn't like derail you. And I think the decision of, oh, I have a 650, should I apply with that or should I keep trying for a 750 is very personal. And I think a lot of time people make that decision based on how much time, like, do I really need to go this year or can I wait an extra year? And then obviously depending on all the other aspects of the application and how you see that coming together.
I think I'll just add one thing quickly on GMAT score. If you take it the first time and you're not very happy with your score, let's say you get a 670 and you feel like I can do a bit better, the outcomes also look at it very favorably if you take it again and improve your score. So don't think that if you take it several times, then you're going to look bad. They actually look at it as this is someone who tries to improve. So it's okay to take it twice, thrice, and keep showing that improvement in your score.
Okay, thank you for that, Eugene. Now moving on to culture fit, essays and interview. I know you mentioned some things earlier about it. I know that Stanford is big on impact, Stanford is big on technology and entrepreneurship, right? So how did you approach your own essay? And can you tell us what does ADCOM, that's admission committee, really look out for in an application, and how can we tell our own story, basically?
I can start, and I'll just mention a few things. I think one, especially for Stanford, I mean, I don't know how many people have gone to the website, but the essay prompt for, they have two essays. The first one is what matters most to me and why, and then the second essay is why Stanford. So, and I think when somebody asks you a question that says what matters most to you and why, that's a very personal question. So I think one thing they're looking out for when they're reviewing your essays is this somebody that sounds like they really know themselves? Because that's the only way you'll be able to answer what matters most to me and why. And I think tied to that as well, Stanford's motto is change lives, change organizations, change the world. So I think as you're writing your essay, you should be able to tell a story about yourself, the circumstances that drive you, whether it's your family, whether it's your religion, whether it's something that happened to you as a child, whether it's some career experience that you had, what's a circumstance or a situation or something that is at the core of the person that you've become today. How has that influenced your journey so far? And how does that contribute to the way you want to change the world? I think if I were to describe in one sentence, that's really what they're looking for in that first essay. And then in the second essay, it's like, why Stanford? Why do you think Stanford is a special place? Why do you want to come here? And how is that going to contribute to the big vision that you have for your life? I think a lot of time, when I've looked at people's essays for them, they just describe their career in chronological or non-chronological order. But you're already submitting a resume, you don't really need to do that. I think a lot of times you need to have a central team, like this big vision, and then you can weave together stories around that big vision. And what you're really trying to do is to get whoever is reading your essay to develop an emotional connection to what you're saying. And I think once you're able to build that emotional connection, it's really powerful, because I think a lot of people are going to be hard pressed to tell their career stories in a way that would necessarily distinguish them from the thousands of other really qualified people that are applying to these programs. So if you just stick to telling your career progression in chronological order, that might not really fly. But if you can tell a story that's like really powerful and that connects to you and how you want to change the world, then it can also, that's something that the admissions committee can connect to.
Eugene, please.
Great. So I think as you think about your essays and by extension your recommendations, I think the first thing you've got to check off are the stereotypes that you'll hear from people. There's so many stereotypes around what each business school is about. And I remember for me when I was applying to Stanford initially, I was tempted to to sell a tech or entrepreneurship story, and it, because that was the stereotype, right? And then I go to Stanford and realize Stanford sends more people to private equity proportionally than any other school. So I stuck to my finance story, and that's what I want to do. And I got accepted at Stanford without having to pretend to want to, do a startup or work in tech, right? Stuff that I'm not really interested in. So you've got to be genuine. Don't try to conform to any stereotypes. Most of them are really, really wrong. People will tell you Wharton is a finance school, even though now they probably send more people to tech than, to Silicon Valley than to Wall Street. So don't conform to stereotypes. And then when you think about your essays and your story, so yes, it's true that Stanford is huge on impact. So how I'd like to think about the application is, what problem do you want to solve? And they don't expect you to change the world, but what problem do you want to contribute to solving? What problem in your field have you seen, and what do you want to do about it? So that's how to think about it. So let's say you work in venture capital, and this week there's been a lot of talk about local founders not having the same shot at raising funds as foreign founders. And maybe you work in venture capital in Africa or for a startup, and you've seen that as a problem, and you feel there's something you can do about it. I guess that's really what this is about. I've been in my field and I've seen this, and it makes me angry, and I want to do something about it. This is what I want to do about it, and this is why I think I can do something about it. So what really about you shows that you can have some impact in the tech space. So you can't just write a startup story when you have no startup experience, right? So there has to be something that shows you can do something about it, and then finding inspiration from your entire life story. So you've got to go way back to growing up, right? I had studied math in undergrad. My dad was a math teacher, and he always only cared about my math grades. That's an influence that I've had since I was a child. So I think you've got to go that far back and find where have the inspirations, how have you ended up where you are today. And you've got to go, and I think Stanford wants you to go as far back as possible, because I think more than any other school, they really care about who you are as a person rather than what you've accomplished as a professional. And that even shows in the interview. I think I probably spent half of my interview speaking about my family and my experiences that I've had from my family rather than what I used to do at work. So they really care. And I think that also goes to your choice of recommenders. It's not about finding, Nigeria's Minister of Finance to write a recommendation because he's friends with your dad or she's friends with your mom. That doesn't cut it at Stanford. They really want people who know you, who can speak about you as a person, what values you represent. So that success, those accomplishments you're selling are a product of certain values that you have as a person. I think that's what the school is trying to really understand. What values does this applicant have, and are those kind of values that we want to have on our campus? And I think just lastly on stereotypes, like for example, the thing about Stanford is all about tech is really wrong. I think the focus is change. It's just that we happen to be in a time when tech is creating a lot of change, but the underlying focus of Stanford embraces change and sort of taking risk. And so they are happy to hear about your failures and what you've learned from those failures, and the fact that failure doesn't put you down. So it's not really just about tech. It's the focus is really change. So don't limit your thinking to, let me find something tech related to write about. It's really, how do you embrace change? How do you thrive in an environment that's constantly changing? And that's the kind of world that we live in now.
Okay, thank you so much. Still on essays and interviews, we would like you to talk about your interview process. How was it? What did you learn? How did it go, basically? What can we learn from that? And secondly, in your essays, how should you, as an African, how should you project yourself? So is Stanford very big on the use of I did this, or you want to present yourself as a collaborative person and say we did this. So how should you approach that?
I didn't really talk about my my career per se in my essays. So in terms of answering that question as to should you use I or we in your essay, I didn't really talk about my career or sort of the stuff I did. I told a really personal story, so I was definitely using a lot of I's. For your interview, I think so. Stanford's interview process is different in the sense that you're not interviewing with a member of the admissions committee. You're interviewing with an alumni. So someone who passed out of Stanford, say 5 or 10 years ago, usually they'll be in the city in which you choose to interview. So my interviewer was a Stanford alum. I forget what class, but she was Zimbabwean living in Nigeria, running a business in Nigeria. And I met her at, I don't know if you guys know the Wings on Uzoma, that Wando building. So I met her at the coffee shop close to the water side. And Stanford's questions are more around, how do I describe this? They're more questions like, instead of about the content of your job, they're about behaviors and attitudes. So for example, how would you go about convincing a difficult boss to take a different course of action? That's an example of a question they'll ask you. They'll ask you how, describe to me a team that you've led and how you manage to lead that team. So I think what you're trying to suss out is they want to learn more about your personality, how you approach life situations, and how you interact with people in general. I think the HBS, for example, their questions are more about your career. So they can tell me about this transaction you worked on at Sahel Capital. So I think those are like two different styles of interviewing. And I think in the Stanford situation, it's really up to you to tell stories that allow whoever is interviewing you to get a better sense for who you are. And I think what they're trying to test is, would this person fit in at Stanford? Will I actually enjoy going to class with this person every day? And it really boils down to them trying to understand your personality. And I think when you're trying to tell those kind of stories, I think you do use a lot of we's, but you also use a lot of I's. Like, I decided to do A, B, C, D, and it resulted in the team achieving A, B, C, D, E. So it's kind of I think, a interaction of the collective and the individual as well.
Okay, I'll start with the interviews. I think I did all my 3 interviews probably within the same 2 weeks, and they were all extremely different between Stanford, Harvard, and Wharton. So I think, as Uzo says, Stanford's interview is very chill. It's with an alumni, and I think the question they're trying to answer is, would I want this person to be my classmate? Like, if I was going to Stanford today, would I want this person as my classmate? And I can think of 3 things that would make someone want to be your classmate. One is this person brilliant, right? Everyone wants to be part of a network of brilliant people around the world. So they'll ask some questions just to see, that could be, maybe 1 or 2 things about your job or anything else that you engage in, but they want someone who's brilliant. Number 2, they want someone who's interesting, right? Yes, you work in consulting or you run a startup, but what other interests do you have, right? Is this someone you'll want, to go on a trip to go to Vegas or Napa Valley with over the weekend? Is this someone you can talk to about, American football or whatever other interests they have? And then lastly, is this person a douche, right? I think that's probably the last thing anyone wants on a Stanford campus. I think people are extremely helpful and collaborative, and people don't want someone who is extremely arrogant about their accomplishments. So I think that's something they'll be looking out for, and I think you can think about the I and we's in that particular context, but they don't want someone who is a douche who has any tinge of arrogance in them. So I think that's how the interview is about. I think HBS interview was a lot of pressure. Like, I came out of there like, not even knowing whether I did well or badly. It was, lots of questions in a very short time, about work, so it was, I think they probably try to gauge whether this person would succeed in a case environment where they have to, a very short time to make an important point in class. And then I think Wharton's was a team-based discussion. And I think that's probably coming off some stereotypes that Wharton grads are not very collaborative. They don't know how to work in a team. So Wharton is extremely focused about teamwork in their curriculum right now. And I think their interview is really best to see how you work in a team and whether you can work on a team. So you get an assignment with a team of people. So again, three different interviews looking for different things in the candidate. In terms of the essays, I think I agree with Uzo. I didn't write anything about my work in my essay. I probably wrote something about a business trip I took, but it was more about an insight that I had while traveling around Africa for work. So it wasn't about, oh, I did this project, and there's stuff to write all those things in the essay. In the application. The essay it's pretty much, it's meant to be personal and about you as a person, and not you listing your academic or professional accomplishments. So I don't think you have to worry a lot about the I and the we, but it's about telling stories that really explain. If you're saying you want to fix healthcare in Nigeria, right? It's about sharing those stories, those encounters you've had with the healthcare system, that make you angry and make you want to do something about it, rather than what you accomplished as a doctor or as as a nurse or whatever else, whatever other role you had in that space. So that's what I'd say about it. I didn't write about my work in the essay. I think you're on mute.
Oh, apologies. I didn't realize. So I said, thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Uzo. Moving on to recommendations, right? We've talked about how your recommenders must be people that can write about you. So, would you say there are some kind of recommenders, right? So, what must this person have a kind of profile before they can write a recommendation for you? Must they be like a partner where you work, or the CEO, or like Eugene mentioned, the finance minister? So is it more about the position? Is it important that the person must have a great position, or how should you decide who should be your recommender, basically?
I think a lot of people, there's the assumption that the person who recommends you should have gone to business school. That's not true, and I think the school would also tell you that that's not true. I think the person who's in most cases, the person who's in the best position to recommend you is somebody who has worked with you day to day at whatever role or work it is that you want to talk about or highlight in your essay. So a lot of time, in my case, I had my current boss at the time and my former boss recommend me. So an organization that I spent 3 years at, I was working with my boss very closely. And then my former boss had spent 2 years at that company as well. I also worked with him very closely. And I felt that they could both speak to my job and my achievements, but they could also speak to the kind of person I was as a human being. And they could tell stories that would paint a picture of who I am. So I don't think there's a particular archetype of person that's the perfect recommender. Obviously, if, say, your boss has gone to business school, the odds are that they know what the admissions committee is looking for in a recommendation letter. So maybe they might not need as much guidance versus someone who's never been to business school, and you kind of need to provide some guidance to that person. But I don't think there's a specific archetype of person who should recommend you. The person just needs to know you really well to be able to write a good recommendation letter. And obviously, I'll also add, the person needs to know you well, and the person also needs to care about your success to be able to write a good recommendation letter. I mean, I've heard horror stories about you ask someone to write a recommendation letter and they actually don't write something really good about you. You don't want to be in that position. So you want to make sure that this person actually cares about my success and is invested in my career doing well.
Okay, thank you.
Well, yeah, so I had to go through some recommendations for the Knight Hennessy Scholarship, just the incoming cohort, and it's true. There's actually a good number of recommenders who write negative stuff about the candidates. So the very first thing that your recommender has to be not just someone who you think likes you, but someone who's crazy about your success, right? And then the next thing is that they have to know you really well. They've got to know you not just as a professional, but as a person. So even if it's your boss and your boss is, you're fortunate to have a boss who's willing to recommend you, then it's up to you to, so there are no perfect recommenders. No one wakes up and has, unless maybe you're in the US and you leave undergrad and go out at Goldman Sachs or McKinsey, where everyone goes to business school after a few years, and maybe it's easy to find a recommender. But if you're out here in Africa, you're going to have to build your own recommender, and that's why you have to start planning early, right? Because if you have a very good boss who likes your job, but they know nothing about your personal life or your background, because the school is going to ask that, what aspects of Eugene's background influence the kind of person he is at work. Now, they're going to also ask what feedback this person has given you. What are your weaknesses? What feedback have you received? And what have you done about it? So you have to build the recommender by making sure you have a set of people who care about you, who you go to and ask for feedback and ask questions, and they sort of follow your professional progress. Okay, so if you're like, I was lucky to have my boss willing to recommend me. He recommends, people every 2 or 3 years. So I was fortunate. He knows what is asked. He knows how to do it. He's done it successfully for years. I was fortunate, and he had no problem sending people to business school. Some bosses don't want you to leave. So I used my boss for, I was planning to apply to 3 schools in round 1 and 3 schools in round 2, and he was happy to write 6 recommendations. You might have someone who's a good recommender, but they're not going to write 6 recommendations for you. They might only write 1 or 2. So that's why you need a broad set of people, and you can distribute them across the schools. I used my boss for all 3 applications. And then for the second recommendation, I used someone different for each of the recommendations based on, what I thought would work for the school, right? So when I applied to HBS, I had a mentor who was the CEO of a regional company, had an MBA, and I thought they'd like that. So I used him. For Stanford, I used someone who's more of a mentor, not even in my field, but really knows me as a person, because I thought Stanford would want to know more about me as a person. And then for Wharton, I just used my current boss and my former boss because I thought they only care about me as a professional. I might have been wrong, but that's what I did. But you might need more than just 2 people. I think if you're applying to a scholarship program, it also requires recommenders. Like for example, Knight Hennessy Scholarship, they don't want necessarily professional recommenders. They want people who've known you for approximately 10 years. So people who've known you for a long time. I was lucky to have a professor from undergrad that I had a good relationship with, who supervised my projects, who was patron of an organization that I led, and who I've kept touch with since I finished college. So you might want to build, I had to build that relationship. I was out of the country, and I made sure whenever I was in Kenya, I had lunch with him and told him what I was doing at work, and try to bring my bosses to come to speak to current students, so that he had stuff to write on the recommendation. But even if you get the most senior person in your country to write your recommendation, but they don't have something to write, it won't work. And I think Stanford would be very good at seeing the bluff. So if you just get someone because they're senior in your company. I remember the VP of my team was willing to recommend me. He came and told me, Eugene, yeah, I'm happy to write a recommendation for you. And he said, just write it and I will sign. And at that point, I refused to use him, and I used someone who was a bit junior, because that junior person knew me a lot more, had seen my work, my relationship with my colleagues, and actually had stuff to write. While the more senior person wanted me to write the recommendation myself, which is very hard. You'll have written essays, you'll have very little left to write. So please don't go for a recommender who wants you to write your own recommendation. That's already a bad sign.
Okay, I was really going to ask a question on your last statement, Eugene, about recommenders asking you to write your own recommendations so that it can align with your essay and the story you are trying to sell. So I think from your own perspective, you're saying it's not a good idea. You should probably look for another recommendation.
No, so I think what you can do about that is this. So I shared my resume to my recommenders, and an extra 2 pages where I provided some additional detail. For example, what's my long-term career plan? What's my midterm plan? What's my short-term plan? What are my other co-curriculars? What's my family background? You know, who are my siblings? What do they do? So it's up to you to give the information to the recommenders. So I think the best thing to do is to try and share this information over time, right? To make sure your boss knows what other, so let's say if you're supporting, Teach for Nigeria and you engage with that on weekends, let your boss know when you meet on Monday and people are asking how your weekend was, say how you traveled to, this rural girls' high school to participate in a career talk. So it's up to you to let these people know what else you do outside of work, right? So that they have the information. Now, they will not know everything, and there are things that they might ask you, and that's totally fine. But try and make sure they have the information they need over time. And this is not something you do in a week or in a month. That's why you have to start preparing early by having these people and having constant communication, that monthly coffee chat or quarterly coffee chat with them, where you give them an update about what you're doing and where you're up and what you're up to. So of course, no recommender will have all the information they need, and they might come and ask you something like, by the way, where did you go to elementary school, right? Because maybe they want to write something about it. But try and make sure they have as much information as they need. But if you'll have a lot of writing, you'll be applying to many schools and writing so many essays. Someone telling you to write your own recommendation again is additional work. And I think if you've sat in an admission committee for 30 years, you can tell that this essay and this recommendation was written by the same person, because everyone has a way that they write, right? You use the same connecting words, you use the same phrases, and there's going to be a lot of similarity in your essay and that recommendation that you write for yourself.
Yeah, I would echo what Eugene just said. I think you can't tell somebody to recommend you and then you just tell them, oh, please recommend me. They say yes. And then you check back in a month, oh yeah, where's the letter? You have to give them material that they can work with. And a lot of time that means, I think in my own case, I prepared a recommendation pack that I sent out over email, which had my resume, had 2 or 3 pages of my long-term career goals, what I wanted to do. I also talked about because these were my bosses, I talked about projects I had worked with them on and what happened during that project, the ways I showed up. I also talked about some feedback they had given me over the course of my time, so they can sort of have material they can pull from when you're trying to do a letter for you.
Okay, I think that is really, really great. So I have a recommendation pack and help them know who you are so that they can write something good about you. Moving on to work experience. So the average work experience for Stanford is 4.6 years, right? So do I need to have that amount of experience before I submit my application? That's the first thing. And the second thing is, do I even need to have a managerial role? So you hear people say you should be a manager or thereabouts before you go for your MBA. What are your thoughts towards that?
I'll take the last one. I was an analyst at IFC. That's the entry-level role. So you totally don't need to be a manager to apply to business school, unless you're applying to executive MBA. But to a normal MBA, you don't need to be a manager. Then about the years of experience, the average they show is the average at matriculation, not at the time you apply, right? So you can apply. So it means if the average is 5 years, people applied when they had only 4 years experience. I'd say, you find there are people in business school, a few people. There's more young people in European programs. I think in the US, there's a few, people with 2 years work experience, but this will mostly be people who were accepted into the program when they were still in undergrad. So I think some schools have the 2+2 program, and you'll mostly see it's people who went to the same institution. Like someone who was at Stanford undergrad, was doing extremely well, had a lot of accomplishments, and they got an early admission to the program. So they step out, work for 2 years, and come back. So probably if you're applying from out here with 2 years experience, an African undergrad and experience in Africa, that's probably not going to cut it. It's probably too early. But also on the higher end, I have classmates who are 36, 40 years old. There are people who are in the Navy. There are doctors. There are people from non-traditional careers who tend to come with a lot more experience. But if you're in finance, consulting, the traditional fields, I'd say going to business school with about 5 years experience is ideal, 4 to 6 years experience. And also that's because some of the jobs most of the jobs you look for after school will require 5 years experience or close. So if you go with 2 years experience, then getting a job after might be a challenge. You might have to start a level lower than your classmates.
Yeah, I'll just echo what Eugene said. But I'll also add that I think one of the reasons why sometimes it seems that people who get admitted have a bit more experience under their, have more experience is because one thing that the schools are also looking for is your ability to contribute to the program, to the conversations in class, to your classmates. And I think a lot of times the only way you can do that is when you have like solid work experience that you can speak to. And in Nigeria, I would say that, I don't know, it also depends on the job, but I would say that at least 3, maybe 4 years of experience, unless you're obviously working, I don't know, in some special role where you're saving the world and like doing really amazing things, then maybe if you have 2 years of experience, it might also fly.
Okay, so people are asking, I have a question. They're saying, is it proper in Nigeria, do you count NYSC as part of your experience or proper professional experience? Can you just quickly answer that?
I think it would depend on what you did for your NYSC. I did my NYSC between 2012 and 2013. But I got into business school. I applied to business school in 2017. So I had around 4 years of proper work experience at that point. But for my NYSC, I taught at state school, GS1 mathematics. So I actually recognized that as volunteering work. I didn't recognize that as proper professional experience. I think depending on what you do, obviously if you're working in McKinsey for your NYSC or you're a lawyer, then that's proper professional experience and you can categorize it as such. So 1 year of NYSC and 1 year of full-time work, I wouldn't advise to apply at that point.
Okay, at least 3 or 4 years at least. Then touching on what Eugene said about someone applying at 38, so does age really have an impact on your application? What is too early, what is too late? Anybody can take that, Uzo or Eugene.
No, I mean, so this is the thing. I think if you're too young, the problem is just going to be that many of the classes won't make sense to you, right? When people are discussing strategy and firing employees and managing a team, and you've worked 1 year at Google, like nothing will make sense. So you'll just be in business school to get an academic paper, but you won't be able to participate in class. So it's going to be tough. But I think on the older side, I don't think there's a limit. As I said, I have a classmate who's 40 years old, who is somewhere in their late 30s. But again, I think that also depends on the field you're in. For example, if you have 10 years experience in finance, then you're already in management in finance. Probably a normal MBA is not for you, right? You might be told to go for the executive MBA, or what in Stanford we call the MSX program, which is a 1-year program. And you'll find the people in that program tend to come in with, 8+ years of experience in a field like finance. So if you're in finance, consulting, tech, you're probably expected to go to a normal MBA a bit earlier. But if, let's say, you work in the army, or you're a teacher, or you're a nurse, a doctor, or an entrepreneur, you're coming in with a non-traditional background, then age, I don't think it's important. You can come in with, at 35, 40. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for that, Eugene. Now going on to funding, please. This is the part that I had like lots and lots of people talk about, but people are still asking me on it. So we want you guys to please tell us how how you guys went through it. So Eugene will be talking about the ninth NSC scholarship, while Uzoma will be talking about the Stanford Africa scholarship, right? So just before you talk about those ones, though, I know that there are other scholarships in Stanford. I know there is the Stanford need-based. So I would want you to confirm if that is need-based or it is merit-based. There is TY Danjuma. I saw something about an OPEC scholarship as well. So I wouldn't mind you guys touching base on other external funding before you now talk about Night NSC for Eugene and Stanford Africa for Uzo. So if Uzo can go first.
Yeah, I can go quickly. I would say, I think before talking about scholarships, I think one piece of advice I got when I was applying was don't let the worry about not being able to afford going to school stop you from applying, especially to schools like Stanford or HBS. I've never heard of one person who got into any of these schools and couldn't go because they didn't find the money or the resources. I think you've already touched on it a bit in terms of if you get into Stanford, there's financial aid. And essentially what financial aid does is that it looks at your salary history. What were you earning maybe in 2-3 years before you came to school? And then based on that, they'll put together a package of financial aid. And usually that would say, oh, you qualify for X $1,000 worth of financial aid, that's free money. And then you're also entitled to borrow up to X amount of money. And for a lot of these top schools like Stanford or HBS or Wharton, they're financial lenders who will be willing to give you funding to pay for whatever is not covered by financial aid. So yes, I did get the Africa Fellowship, but I still had to borrow money. And I think like a lot of like Nigerians or Africans are worried about the notion of borrowing thousands of dollars to fund your education. But the reality is that in the US, like a lot of people right from undergrad, you're already borrowing money to pay for your education. It just so happens that in many African countries, public school is affordable enough, and a lot of time private school to some degree is affordable compared to like the US. But I think you should first and foremost do away with the notion of, oh, I can never borrow money to go to school. Because I think if you put that as a barrier, that already closes a lot of doors to you. I think it's okay being amenable to that. For the Africa Fellowship, I will caveat by saying that I'm not sure that program right now is on hold. I don't know if they're going to restart it, but the Eugene's class was the last class, if I'm not wrong, that was able to access that pool of money. So that's kind of no longer an option, but you can still apply for regular financial aid. And a lot of times for people coming from Africa, the odds are that regular financial aid is going to cover at least 40% of your cost of attendance. And the rest obviously would be loans and then your personal savings. And obviously there are other scholarship options out there. TY Danjuma, I applied for that, I got that as well. It's not like a lot of money like the Africa Fellowship, but it would cover something. There's also one called Mustard Seed Foundation. It's basically a foundation owned by the church, and I think they fund a couple people to go to Harvard, Stanford, Wharton. You just need to demonstrate your relationship with the church, and obviously write a good essay and all of that. And a couple other schools like HBS have the 7-Up Fellowship for Nigerians specifically. But I will go back to the point I mentioned in the beginning. Don't let your fear of not being able to pay for school stop you from applying. I think it's a lot harder to get in to these schools than it is to find funding to go to these schools. So I would kind of like focus my energies on getting in first, and then the financing will figure itself out eventually.
Okay, just before Eugene comes in, for you, was it the Stanford MBA scholarship as well as the other scholarships? Are they separate applications from your MBA applications? And what did you have to do? Well, you had to write an essay. What else was considered?
For the Africa Fellowship at the time, I think it changed as of recently or as the last time it was offered. But at the time, I had to write a 250-word essay and submit that in June or so. And then at that time, they'll tell you if you were shortlisted. And then it wasn't until you actually got into Stanford that they would actually tell you if you were selected for the fellowship as well. But for TY Danjuma, that was actually pretty straightforward. And it's not just for Stanford or HBS. I think for the top 10 schools in or something like that, you just send an email and your resume. But I think the difference there is that they had, I think, 2 or 3 interviews. So you have to prepare for the interview. So I think the interviews was their way of like assessing people versus using an essay. And I think for Mustard Seed Foundation, you do have to write an essay and you do have to get recommendation letters. And I think one of them has to be from a leader in your church who can speak to your character. So it will kind of depend depending on the scholarship option you're going for.
Okay, thank you. Eugene, full or night NSA, please.
Yeah, I mean, allow me to just first agree with Uzo. Like, when it comes to certain schools, please get in fast. Don't even think about the money. They'll worry about it. Okay. So if you know top schools that have a huge Africa focus, they will make the money work for you. And I think Stanford, Harvard, and I'd say Oxford really fit that bill. So your focus should be getting admitted, and then the schools will figure it out. So I applied to the Africa Fellowship 250-word essay only. I got awarded the fellowship. That covers full tuition. That is currently under review at Stanford, and the reason is because I think there's a caveat that people have to return to Africa after 2 years of work in the US for at least 2 years, and I think that hasn't. The feedback around that hasn't been very positive from the past scholars. So I think they're trying to review that aspect. So I'm certain something will come up. But in the meantime, at least the 3 African students I know who've been admitted this year have still gotten full tuition, at least full tuition. I know one has gotten, full tuition plus living expenses, despite the Africa Fellowship not being there. And the other 2 I know have gotten full tuition in need-based fellowship. So again, if you're applying from Africa, you're probably the least paid person in your class, and the school is going to consider that when giving you a fellowship, as well as the fact that many Africans are supporting their families and their siblings and parents. So if you get into Stanford, for example, as an African, I can assure you, you'll be able to attend. And before I speak about Night Hennessy, the student loans are also very available. And what happens at times when you're going to school, you might have a huge, gap. Like, you have to top up $100,000 in student loans. But once you go to school, between external scholarships and some companies, especially in finance, consulting, some asset management companies, they have diversity programs. And I think those are only going to increase in light of what's happening in the US now, that provide additional funding. So I have friends who went to the US and have gotten up to $80,000 in additional funding from companies that they're going to work for. I have a Nigerian classmate who's going into consulting, who got his MBA fully funded by BCG. So your first task is to get admitted. Once you get admitted, take that letter, flaunt it around companies, and many companies will be willing to pay for it, willing to go for MBA. So Night Hennessy has own separate application. It's scholarship program for any course at Stanford, master's or PhD, and they can fund degrees as well. Maybe if you want an MBA, PhD in law, or MBA plus an MA in education or policy or anything else, they'd fund both degrees and also provide living expenses and a lot of many other benefits. I can't think of a more generous scholarship than Night Hennessy. They also provide funding. I've said, hey, my scholarship at this conference conference, it's important for my career, and they'd pay for your ticket and hotel. I've told them, hey, I'm trapped in campus with COVID, and I wasn't planning to be here. Why am I paying a lot of rent? And they paid that. So they're very, very generous with funding. And I think anyone applying to Stanford has to apply for that as well. And you have to apply within 5 years of undergrad. So if you graduated, I think in 2015 onwards, you can apply in 2020. But if you're 7 years out of undergrad, then I don't think you qualify for applying. So you have to try and apply it within 5 years of leaving undergrad. And it's a separate application on its own website. And if you're applying to Tennessee, you've got to apply in round 1. So you cannot apply for Tennessee if you're applying in any other round. You have to apply in round 1 because they make the decisions in February. And by then, round 2 decisions haven't been made yet by the GSB. So you have to get accepted to Stanford before you can get accepted to Tennessee. So I think your focus has to be first to get accepted to Stanford. And I think the kind of things they look at are quite similar, except that also Tennessee cares about your impact in your community. So if you're going to apply to Tennessee, they want to see that if they're going to pick up that huge tab for your MBA or whatever other degree you do at Stanford, it's going to benefit not just you, but your entire community as a whole. So they're very keen on what do you do for your community. So Tennessee is extremely generous. I think my background on the right is the common area of what is called Denning House, which is the co-working space for Tennessee scholars. And it's just an extra room in campus where you can go and do your own work, interact with scholars from other schools, which is really useful, meet other Stanford professors in schools that you're not attending, and tech classes, tech international trips. And I think they also provide funding if you have ideas. My friend from Nigeria, who's an engineer in the program, just got 40,000 seed funding for a startup idea he has on Africa from Tennessee. So you also have an additional pot of funding if you're a scholar. So that's what I can say in a nutshell. And I think lastly, on recommendations for Tennessee, they have to be different from your MBA. So I used people who knew me sort of as my boss and a professional mentor for my MBA. And then I also used a mentor who's not really in my line of work and a former professor for Tennessee, because they had known me for close to 10 years and would speak more about me as a human being rather than me as a finance professional. So that's Tennessee in a nutshell.
Yeah, great. Thank you so much. Quick question for you, Eugene. Can you apply more than once for the NSA program? So I applied this year and I didn't get it. So can I try again next year?
Yes, absolutely. Same way you can apply to Stanford again, you can apply to Tennessee another year. I have a classmate who applied to Tennessee when coming to Stanford, didn't get admitted. When he got to Stanford to do his MBA, he applied for second degree in the School of Energy and applied for Tennessee again, and now he got accepted. So yes, you can apply more than once, and you can also apply after you join Stanford. So if you join without Tennessee, you can still apply again. And if you're applying for a second degree, which is very common at Stanford. I think the other thing, I think just worth mentioning to encourage people, I think every African in my class is either on a full tuition or entire full ride. So as I said, don't worry about the money.
Well, that's great to hear. So guys, don't worry, just apply, do everything you can to get in, and then you worry about funding later. So moving on to your experience, your MBA experience. So I know HBS is case method. What's the standard like in Stanford, and how was the whole MBA, maybe Uzo that has finished, and for the 1 year that you've been there, Eugene, how has the experience been for you as a person, considering that, I mean, you had to leave work, you had to stop earning money. So how has it been? It's still looking like it's worth it, how generally?
I'll definitely say it's worth it. I think it's the experience of a lifetime, especially coming from given my background and coming from having lived and worked in Nigeria all my life. I think I definitely feel like the past 2 years have been like an amazing experience. I would definitely do it again if given the chance. I think in terms of the education, particularly, it's obviously very different from the way we do school in Nigeria. Like you have very few classes that just a lecturer speaking at you. You're actually supposed to interact in the classroom with the lecturer and with your classmates. I think compared to HBS, we don't just do cases at Stanford. They had cases, they had experiential classes. You have a lot of lab classes. There's one called Startup Garage, which is basically supposed to help you iterate around the business idea with a couple of classmates. So there's a wide variety of classroom options at Stanford compared to HBS and some of the other schools. I think each system has its own merits. And I think a lot of time, like when people are trying to decide between one school and the other, they're also thinking about the system of education and which is more suited for what they're looking for. I think a lot of the benefits that people talk about when it comes to going to business school is obviously education, but I think the other big aspect of it is like the people you get to meet and interact with. I think you build a network of people that's very different from the network you might have had if you had just done your career in Nigeria. Now I know somebody who works in P in San Francisco. If I was just doing P in Nigeria, the odds that I would have met that person are so much lower. I think you also get to, your worldview as a human being really expands during that period of time. I think one of the reasons I wanted to go to business school was I wanted to sort of expand my international exposure. I'd only worked in Nigeria, only gone to school in Nigeria, and I wanted to see something else. And so I decided that was one of the reasons why I decided to apply. And I'll definitely say that all of the different classroom experiences, life experiences, the trips, the parties have all expanded my worldview as a human being. So that definitely is a plus in terms of going to business school in general.
I think I'll only add something about the teaching method. I think as Uzo said, Stanford uses a combination of cases, lectures, and experiential learning. And I think I personally love the variety, because if you have 4 classes in a day and they're all cases, it means there are 4 cases to prepare for. It's a lot of work. And also it means, because the thing with case classes that it's a lot of talking, right? And at times you want to break away from that monotony. So I think for me that worked out. If let's say you have no finance experience or no accounting experience, it's very hard to learn finance or accounting from cases if you're coming with no background. So I think that's sort of the approach that the GSB takes. So if you want to do entrepreneurship and you want to start a company, then you're better off taking a class like Startup Garage or Designing for Extreme Affordability, where you actually get to start a company or work on a business idea rather than just do cases about it. So, and I think that same goes for classes on leadership, such as leadership labs, where you actually have to do stuff as a leader and get feedback on it. I don't see how something like that would be taught using cases. So I think the variety is great, and it also allows you to choose classes that match your learning style. So I think that has been my experience. I like the fact that if I have 4 classes in a day, then maybe 2 of them I have cases to prepare for, and I have to contribute in class, which I think it's also it's one challenging area for Africans. You have an accent, you are not used to it, right? Your undergrad experience was not similar. And you have all these white people who can talk about something they do not know, right? You can be doing a case about distributed energy in Nigeria, and this person has never been to Africa, doesn't really know how a generator looks like, but they'll speak 5 times in class, right? Because they're used to that system. So I think it can be a struggle for you, and especially if class participation is a huge percentage of your grade. I think it's also a tough experience for Africans, and I think having that variety sort of helps you balance your performance across the different classes. But again, it can be very good training if you feel like you're shy and you struggle to contribute in meetings and put out your ideas, and it can be very good practice for you to become more confident about speaking, in front of peers.
Okay, thank you so much. So I have just one more question left. So guys, if you have any question, you need clarity, please send me a chat so I could get your question. So I think my last question is concerning the period we are in right now. There's COVID, there's no traveling, we're considering learning online, right? And I'm thinking, okay, is it really worth spending $200,000 for an MBA? So what is your opinion on that. I mean, are you pro Zoom classes, online networking? I mean, you're going to B school to network and meet with people. Do you think it would be worth it to go for an MBA if this is like the way forward?
Honestly, I didn't know that I have the answers to that question. I'm curious what Eugene thinks. But I spent the last quarter of my time at Stanford doing online classes, and it was definitely dramatically different. But the fact is that I had spent like, well, 5 other quarters having the full experience. So I still feel like I got a bang for my buck and for my time, particularly. I think there are challenges to going to school going to business school in particular when everything is online because you don't get the full experience. And I think it's a personal decision. Can you wait maybe a year to see if COVID gets back to whether things get back to normal, or do you want to go right away? My hope is that in a year from now, things would have cleared up. So if anybody in this call is like thinking of applying, you probably won't be going to school until a year from now. So you probably will be fine. But I don't know, I'm curious to hear what Eugene thinks. I think if you're in a position where you've already established like the basics, so Eugene had 2 quarters of like the full-time experience. I had 5 quarters. So I already had a taste for what the full experience looks like. I already had some relationships. I'm curious to see how different it is if you're starting from day one online. I think it's the same way if you're starting a new job completely online from day one, how that's very different from if you're starting that job in the office. But Eugene, what do you think?
I think even without COVID, I mean, the question of whether an MBA is worth it is something that has created a lot of debate, and I think it's very personal. It's people go to MBA to achieve different things, and I think the question needs to be, what do you want to achieve out of an MBA, and can you do it? I went to MBA because I wanted to, I wanted to get a network in the US. I'd been in Africa and Europe. I wanted to get a network in the US, and I wanted to switch from development finance to private equity. Do I think you can do that during COVID? Absolutely, right? Are companies still hiring MBAs? Yes, they are. So I think this is something that will pass. If you're applying to business school now, you're probably going to matriculate in a year, maybe defy to 2 years. So I think they'll find a way to make it work. So I think you have to be honest about what you want, and then ask if that is possible during this time. I think if you want to switch careers, if you want to change markets, let's say you've worked in Nigeria all your career and you want to go work in New York or in San Francisco, I absolutely think you can do it right now. So I think, but the real value of an MBA, I think what I've seen is not even the jobs that you get out of, but I think just the relationships that you're able to build and the people you interact with. That might suffer a bit, because I think what I enjoyed most in class was the kind of people that professors bring to class is just unbelievable. Like whatever industry you're interested in, they'll bring the most important people in that field to class. And I think having those personal one-on-one conversations with those people is great. Having to do that on Zoom over 1 quarter wasn't as much fun as meeting these people in person. So I think that's probably challenging. But in terms of, if you're thinking about how much money you're spending and whether you'll be able to earn that money back, I don't think that changes whether you do your entire program. Because if you think about it, you're really getting into a network, right? If I'm in Nairobi now and I email any Stanford alumni here who I want to meet, they will make time, right? They don't care whether I took Zoom classes or in-person classes. If you want to tap into that network of that particular school for the rest of your life, then you'll still be able to do that whether a quarter of your classes were over Zoom or not. So I think, I still think it's worth it. And I still think an MBA at a top school is still a very good thing to have. That's my.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll be running through some questions that we have right now. There's a question on your GMAT scores. They initially said that they would not be able to tell us their scores, but please try and get a very good score. Do your best to get a good score. But once you have something good, move on to the other aspects of your application. There is a question on, I'm a penultimate law student actively working to break into banking. I want to apply for MBA under the NSC scholarship. What do I need to stand out? I can try to answer this based on what I've learned. Is really your story. Why do you want to apply for an MBA, and tell your story properly? I think maybe Eugene can please add to that, if you don't mind.
Yeah, so finally a student trying to get into an MBA, I think you definitely have to think about what job you need to take, right? Out of school. So there are probably companies you want to work for that will allow you to get to business school. If you're saying you want to do finance, then you have to find a finance job that's at probably a place that I assume you're in Nigeria, then at a company that's at least has a track record of sending people to business school, and at times you need to take, for example, IFC has a great track record of sending people to top business schools, but you cannot get to IFC straight off undergrad, right? So I had to take a job that allowed me to get investment experience in Africa, which then allowed me to join the IFC. So at times you have to take a job before the job, and then you're able to do your application. In terms of standing out, it's real quick. Night Hennessy wants three things. One is people who outthink their peers. Two is people who outwork their peers. And I think if you tick those two boxes, you are getting admitted in the MBA program. So if you work on being accepted into the MBA program, you'll have ticked those first two boxes. And the last one is people who outcare their peers. So what shows that you care about your community? And that's just the kind of community engagement that you spend your time doing. And yeah, I see a question on the GMAT. If you're applying to just an MBA, GMAT is fine. But if you're considering probably doing a second degree, a joint degree, you need a GRE for that. So probably doing a GRE allows you to apply to other courses as well, other than the MBA. I've put my email on the chat. If anyone wants GMAT material, I have a ton of those. Just send me an email and I'll share.
Actually, we'll just get that and share with everybody. So we merge this with some other materials we got earlier and then send to everybody. So GRE, GMAT, anyone you're doing would share some materials with you. And another question, I think still for Eugene, is how suitable is an MBA for a lawyer? I heard when Eugene said something about its unsuitability for auditors. So I'm just wondering for lawyers. I think you got that.
Well, there's many lawyers in my class. There's many people. I know tens of people doing a JD in law and an MBA. I think it depends on anyone can go to business school. It depends on what you want to do after. So I didn't say that an MBA is not suitable for auditors. I said if all the auditor wants to do is become a partner at Deloitte, they don't need to go to business school to do it. They can stay at Deloitte and work their way up, right? But if let's say
I'm not sure. Is it just me that lost Eugene, or is everybody?
I think it's everybody.
I think it's everyone.
Oh, okay. I guess it's network and it would just join back. While we're waiting for Eugene, Uzo, I have a question. Said, I would like to know how good Stanford is for someone looking at building a career in consulting.
Sorry, can you hear me?
Yes, now we can.
All right, sorry. So I was just wrapping up. So I was saying, it's not about if you're a lawyer and all you want to do is become a partner at a law firm, you don't need an MBA and the school wouldn't see a reason to admit you. But let's say you're a lawyer who wants to start their own business, or you want to start a startup like Do Not Pay in the US that provides legal services to low income people at almost zero cost, then that makes sense to go to business school for. So it depends on what to do after, or maybe you want to switch careers and go work in finance or in consulting, then it makes sense to go do an MBA. But if you just want to remain a lawyer in a law firm, that will not make sense.
Okay, thank you, Eugene. Do I need to repeat the question, Uzo?
No, I think I got it. I think business school in general is really fantastic for consultants, especially if you're not necessarily coming from a consulting background before school. It's there's a very defined track record for interviewing for consulting internships, interviewing for consulting jobs full time. So if what you're trying to do is to get into consulting after school, it's very easy to do. I would say all the consulting firms, well, the top ones, come to school to have coffee chats, have dinners, and to recruit. So that's a very defined process.
Okay, I have another question here, both for you and Eugene. Says, looking back now, what do you think was the main aspect of your application, experience, goals, personality, that made you choose Stanford and ultimately made you get admitted by Stanford?
I mean,
no, Eugene, go ahead.
All right. So I think what I'd say, it's really hard to know why you got admitted, right? It's unless you sit in adcoms, it's really hard to know. When you're applying, you're really scared and you don't think you're good enough. So it's really hard to point at any one thing. I think it's the entire portfolio of your application. What I'd say is I think US programs care a lot about the qualitative part of your application. Sort of what are your motivation, your essays, who's recommending you, and what are they saying. Then European programs tend to just care a lot about, do you have a good GPA, good experience, and have you passed the GMAT? I think in terms of why I think I chose Stanford, I mean, I've been competing all my life from elementary school to undergrad to, at the workplace. I just wanted to be at a place where I don't feel like I have the need to keep competing with people, but also as I said, I want to work in Africa, and when it comes to focusing on Africa and having Africa-focused programs, I think Stanford is doing an amazing job right now. I have there's about 80 people doing Stanford internships around Africa, all funded by the school. So there's a huge focus on Africa at Stanford right now, and that just, for me, felt like the right place to go.
Yeah, I think similar to Eugene, I don't think there's a particular answer in terms of it was definitely my essay that got me admitted. I don't think anybody can really say that. In fact, I always tell people who reach out to me that there's a lot of like fortune and good luck that comes with applying, because you can't really say what it is that got you in. You can just attest to the fact that you put together a good application in general. In terms of Stanford, why Stanford? I actually applied to 2 schools. And I think up until the day when I decided to go to Stanford, I was still conflicted in my decision. Because the other school I applied to, it's like when you tell people business school in Africa, that's the one that their mind goes to. So I was still conflicted that, this other school has a better network in Africa, why don't I go there, and things like that. But I think at the end of the day, Stanford is the #1 business school in the world. It has a very unique value proposition and also a very unique culture. And I think all those things like put together just like tugged at my heartstrings, and I decided to go in that direction. And I think also the fact that I got a good chunk of my cost of attendance covered by Stanford was also another determining factor for me.
Okay, thank you so much. Last question, because we're way over time. It says, is it more difficult to get into an MSc program than an MBA program?
I never applied to an MSc, so I can't really say. But I think for Stanford has a 5% admissions rate or something like that. Eugene, correct me if I'm wrong, 5 or 4%. So it's definitely very difficult to get into Stanford or HBS, so most of the top MBA programs. I don't know. I don't have any basis for comparing that to master's degree programs.
No, I think is that MSc in finance or any other MSc program? I mean, I think it really depends. If you're trying to get into an MSc engineering program at Stanford, it's definitely very tough as well. But if it's about MSc finance, then there's a lot more demand for an MBA, and just because people from all kinds of fields, lawyers, doctors, engineers, apply to MBA programs. So you have 10,000 people applying to top MBA programs. So it's a lot harder to get in as opposed to fewer applications for MSc finance programs. I wouldn't know about other MSc programs.
Okay, thank you so much for today. I hope you've gotten your questions answered. I hope you have more insights. I would give Sheon a chance to conclude on this session right now. Sheon there.
Yeah, hi, Finn.
Hi, Sheon.
Okay. Well then, thank you so much. Hi, everyone. Hi, Eugene. Hi, Uzo. We're super grateful for the contribution and also the time you have committed to this so far. And so without saying much, I think you can all see my screen. Yeah, I have the deadline for the Night Scholarship and also for the round 1, 2, and 3 of the applications. Yeah, so round 1 closes on September 1st. Round 2 is January 6th, 2021. And round 3 is 6th of April, 2021. The Night NSA is October 14, but before you apply for that, you need to apply for during round 1, which is closing on September 1st. Yeah, please take note of that. So I'm sure you really got lots of insights during the session, from clarity from your GMAT to recommenders to articulating your stories clearly, essay, and every other thing. So we expect that you know the next step you're going to take on to start this your MBA journey. We trust you're going to follow it through, and we wish you all the best. Like Blessing earlier said, we'll be doing the top 5 business schools according to the FT ranking. So please stay tuned to us. Follow our social media handles so you get to know when our next session will be holding, and we'll also get to communicate to you via email. So Instagram is TheNarrativeAfrica, on Twitter is TheNarrativeAfr, and on YouTube, TheNarrativeAfrica. So all our videos, recordings will be up on YouTube. So this session, in a couple of hours, I think by Wednesday, we're gonna have it on our YouTube platform. So you could always go there, watch, subscribe, follow us, and also get to share any other material that had been communicated that will be shared. We'll get to share with you during the course of the week before Friday, definitely. So Finny, thank you so much. I think we can call it a day. Make sure, please start your MBA journey. Please start your MBA journey. Yeah. All the best.
Thank you so much for joining. Thank you, Eugene. Thank you, Uzo. We really had a great time. Bye, guys.
Peace out. Oh, yeah.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.